Hey, welcome back. So, back to the flamenco build. My sincerest apologies to anybody who's been watching these videos real time. There has been a delay in the process of this build, mostly, or absolutely, due to the fact that I've been building the Telecaster for Phil Short, and I've switched onto that in order to try and meet the deadline. But we are back to having a little look, and indeed the guitar is almost finished now. All the component parts have been fabricated, have been constructed, ready to go on. Got the bridge, fretboard, the actual guitar itself, and the nut. So all we've got to do now really is to glue the bridge on, glue the fretboard on, carve the neck, and put the frets in, and we'll be ready for finish and strings and beautiful music. So today we're going to have a little look at how I go about popping the fretboard on to this guitar. Now I put the fretboard on before I put the bridge on for a very good reason. As you know, I'm sure, the scale length of a guitar is determined by the distance between the leading edge of the nut and the edge of the bridge saddle. So what I tend to do is to put the neck on first, the fretboard on the neck first, and then once that's glued in place, then calculating that scale length to that point becomes a lot more simple. If you put the bridge on first, then obviously if you get it slightly out, the fretboard will have no relevance to the scale length, and the guitar won't play properly. So I do it that way around. I should be using the same technique as I do for my electric builds, in as much as we'll be using the locating pins in order to stop the fretboard from slipping about once it's in the clamps. And the only real difference is this. I don't have a method by which to support the underside of the soundboard once I'm tapping the frets in. Tapping is a very underactive word. It's actually pounding, I believe, is more the term, and as that would suggest, there's quite a lot of stress put on this particular area when you're walloping the frets in, and that runs the risk of causing some trauma to the soundboard. So I tend to, I say tend to, as you're probably aware, can't even see them. I've only made a couple of flamencos. This would be number 3 of 4. That's number 4 of 4, which you've seen bits of. So what I tend to do is to fret the fretboard up until the 12th fret from a standing start, and then clamp the fretboard down with those frets in. That negates the necessity to give it a darn good wallop with when the fretboard's on there, and reduces the risk of damage to the top. So that's the reason why I do that. We have to be a little bit mindful of the fact that, in the same way as kerf lining, the member of the lining that goes around the inside of the guitar has little slots in it, in the same way the fretboard does. And when you pound a fret into that slot, it obviously is slightly wider than the slot, and there is a tendency for the wood to start to bow. And indeed, if you fretted the entire fretboard before you glued it on, by the time you got to glue it on, it would be quite a curve to it. So we just have to work with and live with the fact that we're going to be doing that for the first section of the fretboard, and just get it nicely clamped down, and hopefully that should pull things back relatively level. Haven't had any issues to date with the other 2 guitars. They've worked pretty well. So that's a technique that I'm going to use. So one beautiful Cocobolo fretboard. I put the 12th fret one in just now, just to show me where to start, if you like, and I took the liberty of banging a few more in just because I felt like it. I'll show you just how to do the remaining frets now. It's fairly simple. If you haven't seen it done before, then do check out my Telecaster build for one. That's got the fretting explained, but in simple terms, what you do, you get your fret cleaning saw or tool, and just drag any dust that might be hanging about in the slots. Just drag it out. Any crud that might have accumulated while you've been sanding and messing about. And then we get a triangular file, and literally just give it a couple of runs over. Not very dramatic, just literally a couple of runs over. And what we're looking to do is create a tiny little V just in the top. That'll help the frets sit a little better. Again, on the telly build, I described reasons for that, and also means that if it ever needs refretting, then when they get pulled out, the chances of tear out from the grain becomes less. So the next guitar technician that gets involved in this guitar sometime down in the future will be most grateful. A little bit of tight bond glue, wood glue, and with a cocktail stick, and just gradually introduce a little bit into the slot. Now this isn't a gluing in of the frets exercise, although technically it would do that. It's more of a filling up the gap exercise. So the reason we do this is that when when it goes off hard, it'll just create a little bit more of a bond around the barbs on the fret tang that hold the fret in place, and it just makes for a more solid fretboard. And yes, I mean, let's be honest, it does to a certain extent glue the frets in as well. So just introducing a tiny little bit into the fret slot, just to fill up the slot. Alright then, get your frets. As you probably noticed, I've cut all my frets to length before I started and popped them in a little numbered block. Offer the frets in and offer them in so that we are nicely upright, so we don't end up banging them in on an angle. That would be terrible. Really ugly when you do that. So hold them up at 90, get your fretting hammer, little tap each end just to get them started, and then I've got this little tool with a notch cut into the underside of it, little tapping stick, and that just helps you to direct the force directly over the fret. If you're hitting it with a hammer, you go either side, you damage the fret as well. So one of these is a very handy thing to have. And that is it. That's all you do. Just wallop them in. And obviously once we've finished, we will clip the ends off and then file them flat and fret level, recrown, redress and polish. So one more, and then I shall vexate you no longer with fretting, for it is easy and obvious. And if you don't know how to do it after watching this, then you probably never will. One more time then would feel, offering it up into its proper place, trying my darndest to keep it upright. Little tap either end just to seat it. My walloping stick. And there it is. The fret wire, as you've noticed, is pre-radius, it's pre-bent, which is great for electric guitars with radiused fretboards. This is a flat fretboard. Classical and Spanish guitars have a flat fretboard, but ironically it actually helps, because obviously as it goes in with a curve on it and you start tapping it flat, it will actually kind of dig in and grip. So yeah, radiused fret wire works just as well as, in fact, if not better, than your ordinary flat fret wire. So I'll get the rest of this fretted, including the pointless frets, as I call them. My fretboard designs, I put this little V, little arrowhead, which kind of mirrors the opposite relief of my headstock design. Just, yeah, why not? The pointless frets. So we'll bang the pointless frets in, and we'll have a look at getting it glued down. Right then, so, do you know, there's already a tiny little bit of relief in the fretboard just from banging those frets in. So it just goes to show that if we'd have walloped them all in, we'd be in trouble. Okay, so locating pins. If you remember, I don't know if you've watched the Telecaster build, please do. But we are going to drill two tiny holes in the fretboard, one in one corner, straight through the fret slot. So one down this end, another one up on the first fret ideally, and again they're opposing. Just knock out the tiny little bit of tear out. Perfect. Now we've got these tiny little veneer pins, which are just right for going into those little holes. So I'll put one in each of the little holes, like that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just offer the nut into place and hold it nice and tight up against the headstock veneer. I'm actually just going to mark the line where the nut sits. Now we offer up the fretboard to that line, and I actually go just cover the line. So the line that I've made with the pencil there, I'm literally just going to offer the fretboard up and just literally just cover it, so that it's going to be a nice tight nut when I pop it in. So make sure the fretboard's nicely lined up, which it is, and then just lovely. So now I've got two little marks where the fretboard will sit, and that will serve as a referencing pin, so we can literally just offer it in and the pins will sit in those slots, and everyone's a winner. That's it. And it will also stop it from sliding around when the pressure's applied with the glue. I'm not overly worried about the frets hanging over the sides at the moment. They'll be sorted out with files and the like a little bit later on. Right then, a clamping we will go. I'm just going to put a little bit on the back of the fretboard, just beyond the 12th fret, because obviously there's no reference down there as to where the fretboard starts and finishes. I know I'm kind of gluing on the underside of where the overhang will be, but obviously that won't get seen. There's no trouble. Great stuff. Now we've got our reference spikes, reference pins. We know that should be around about the 12th fret, so that should be quite easy to find. And that one's in. And that one's. That's it. And all remains now is to clamp it up. There's some very delicate structures underneath this fretboard, so I'm literally going to apply enough pressure just to get some squeeze out and leave it as that. I'm not going to go wanging it down good and proper. I'm going to tack it from the other side as well, and obviously we're going to clean that squeeze out off earliest available opportunity, so it doesn't become a job of work later. Now we've got the shoe of the heel of the guitar at this point, so I know that I can put a little bit of pressure on there. I'm literally watching the squeeze out. There we go, lovely. That's all the way along. And this is another reason why we left some flat planes, why we haven't carved the neck yet, is it gives us something to clamp against. Neck carve is literally going to be the last thing that we do. Right, that should do it. So let's clean up that squeeze out, stick it to one side, and we're good.